We are live.
Cool. Welcome to episode 74 of the PHP Town Hall podcast, Composer Self-Update. Today we're joined by two very special guests who've just achieved a major milestone in the PHP community. I'm going to butcher your last name, so I'm just going to go with Jordy and Nils. Guys, how's it going?
Hey there.
Hey.
So, Jordy, where are you located right now?
I'm in Zurich, in Switzerland.
Cool. And Nils, you're in Germany?
Berlin, Germany. Exactly, yeah.
And Ben, you're still alive.
I'm still alive. I'm in Boston.
Good job.
I survived the COVID. So
Yeah, that's true.
okay.
Ben fought off the COVID-19 a couple weeks ago. So yeah, I almost had to find a new podcast host for this.
I'm sorry, Matt. You're looking forward to it.
I was really looking forward to becoming the benevolent dictator of the podcast. So anyways, we want to kick this off. So Composer just hit version 2. It's been around now for about well over 9 years or so, and it's always ranked as like one of the top 3 things that everyone says revolutionized the PHP ecosystem. So when you hear that from other people, like, how does that make you feel? Like, have you like kind of checked off like a box on a bucket list of like changing the world, or do you just kind of is just like a normal day for you guys? They're so speechless. So
No, I think we have to decide on who actually wants to answer first with one of these. But I guess we'll just see, like, yeah, exactly. We each one of the other person, you go first, which I guess kind of ties into this, where sure, to some degree, it's a bit of a weird, uncomfortable feeling that it's like, oh wait, like all of these people are like using this and on a daily basis, and but no, at the same time, I think, at least for me, it makes me pretty happy to have helped build something that has had such a positive impact on so many people that they do give us this feedback. And it's always great to hear positive feedback like that. There's always complaints about details here and there, and that's kind of a lot of the daily maintainer work. So it's very nice when people bring this up and lists of this has really changed the world of PHP. This has changed how my development works, and it's the same for me too. I mean, I can't really imagine working on PHP projects without Composer anymore. So in that sense, I can relate to these statements a lot because I kind of feel the same way about the tool that I contribute to.
That's a very good answer. I don't think we need to always each have a go, because otherwise this is gonna take all night.
Sure.
So to go back to the beginning, like some projects we kind of know how they got started, like Laravel, Symfony, things like that. How did Composer like kind of get its start? Because it was around before I even started programming, so I don't necessarily know the whole story of Composer. I'm sure other people don't either. So was it just one of your ideas and you threw it out to like a mailing list and the other one joined, or were you two already like best friends and just decided to work on this together?
So it started out, I think, with slightly different ideas than what it ended up being. And for me, the background or origin was that back then I was working on PHPBB, the forum software, looking into building a new plugin system for that. And at the same time, looking into switching to Symfony, I guess components then, or like Symfony 2 in general, which was just about to be released. And so I actually met Jordy at a Symfony conference about 10 years ago. For the first time before we started doing any of that. And then, so when we say 9 years since the beginning of Composer, that's like the first public commit, which was in April 2011. I think I started working on a little bit of code that's now part of the dependency solver maybe in February, kind of just privately, and it wasn't really good for anything. And then Jordy, who had known for a bit over a year at that point, really wanted to help with this, and he was really active in the Symfony community, particularly regarding the new Symfony 2 version. And so he was the one who kind of pushed me to actually make some of this public or like accessible so he could help work on it. And then he kind of took that and turned it into more of a usable tool.
Nice. what kind of drove you to make it more? Trying to phrase this. There were a lot of dependency manager tools that were framework specific. At any point, were you thinking this will be just a Symfony thing, or were you from the start wanting it to be for any PHP app?
Yeah, I think just the fact that Niels was going at it from a PHP BB angle and I was more in the Symfony community, we kind of had an incentive there to make it work generically and not bound to either or. And then the other aspect was that Symfony was also using a bunch of libraries like Doctrine and so on, which had nothing to do really with Symfony and had no knowledge of Symfony. So this had to be just a tool, like not a Symfony plugin installer like Symfony 1 had. So I think it kind of grew accidentally like this, but also it made sense.
Cool. Yeah. So, what from Composer 1 to Composer 2, like what was kind of like the biggest shift of the code base?
I think there's two. I mean, in terms of the code base, I would say there's like two big things that happened. One is the networking code, all of which kind of Jordi took care of. Anything relating to downloading files, interacting with external resources. And the other part is kind of a structural thing in how the core installation process runs. So that's kind of the code that handles what happens when you run a Composer install or a Composer update, and in what order does it do what? Like how does it call the solver, and what does it do with the output, and at what point does it write a log file, and how does it actually then start copying things into the directory?
So I mean, like all that's black magic to me. And personally, like thank you for doing it, because without this tool, I would be stuck with NPM, and that makes me just want to blow my head off. So before like anything else, just thank you for writing such a great tool.
Thanks.
With either Composer 1 or Composer 2, like what was or is the hardest problem you face like on a daily basis with working with Composer?
You mean as an end user or
As a maintainer?
As a maintainer, like I mean, I don't really. The thing is, like with NPM, like it sucks and it's terrible, and I hate it so much. The cool thing with Composer is like I just type Composer and whatever command I need to run, and it works. And that's honestly like the best part of Composer. Like I don't have to think about an error. I don't have to think about searching through log files or anything like that. Like if there's an error, Composer gracefully handles it. If it doesn't work, Composer kindly lets me know, hey, this is a thing. Or if it works, it just magically works. So, but like as a maintainer, maybe like is it like the networking downloads, or is it telling people to stop being jerks? Like what kind of stuff do you like is the hardest stuff you deal with as a maintainer of the project?
I think at this point, because we ironed out so many of the kinks, and like you say, like we just try to make it work most of the time, like smoothly. I would say at this point, it's mostly just people that come up with really weird use cases. Like that's to me, that's the main challenge. Is like saying no to these people that come up and say like, you know, I have this thing and I absolutely need it to go to work that way, and you're like, nope. No, you really don't. But but how do you politely approach that and so on? That's sometimes quite challenging.
What's your infrastructure setup for packages?
It's mostly AWS, like a few machines kind of handling the website and dumping the metadata, and then we have a lot of mirrors all over the place, which are just synchronizing this metadata, and just those are like read-only Nginx machines, which really don't do much. It's just like pumping traffic out. But
so, do y'all maintain packages on top of Composer, or like has that kind of been shifted to someone else's responsibility?
No, we very much maintain that. But yeah, go ahead, Niels.
Yeah, I was going to just explain a bit the history of that maybe as well. So
Sure.
the same way that I mentioned how Composer started with like a first couple of commits, it was actually also in spring 2011 that we registered the domain for packages, and it was kind of clear that we wanted to set up a separate repository, or like, I mean, you had to get a repository with a separate name. And we've been operating it ever since. For the longest time, that was mostly Jordi just owning some single box somewhere, which eventually reached its bandwidth capacity. So really the main problem there infrastructure-wise is usually just the bandwidth, the amount of JSON data that those machines are pumping out. And obviously you also want, you know, little fault tolerance and obviously, of course, also geographic distribution, et cetera. So we started splitting that out more. And the way that we've been handling working on the infrastructure and actually taking some of these bigger steps and spending time with that is that we started working on private packages in 2016, which is a paid service that gives you kind of your own package repository, much like what packages.org is for open source packages for everyone. And we use the money that we make with that service to pay for many, many work hours on Composer 2, on maintaining packages.org, and making those iterative improvements that we've been working on for the last years.
So with private packages, you just brought up a really good point, which is that private packages kind of pays for y'all's work on Composer. Is that pretty much what you two do full time now, is manage both Composer and private packages, or do you also hold down full-time jobs outside of this whole project?
No, it's pretty much what we do. I mean, I still have historically another job on the side, but not. I mean, it's kind of like a part-time situation where I just still work on something else. But the work I do on Composer is fully like work time, let's say. I don't have to do weekends anymore, which is very good. And Niels is full time on private packages and Composer and so on. So
yeah, and I think we've split the work a bit over the years in that Jordi really handles all the maintenance work, the day-to-day GitHub issues, and you know, getting an overview over pull request issues for the next release, building a changelog, etc. And I kind of just help out, step in places where he's like, oh, like I really need your help here. This is like something that you probably should take a look at. Like that's something you know about really well. And then for Composer 2, I kind of had like some specific areas that I really wanted to make some improvements on. And my day job is more private packages than it is Composer packages.org. And at the same time, we managed to really, for that, Jordi mostly spends his work hours just on the open source tools. I mean, he helps it out with ups and like a thing here or there on the private packages. We're actually a team of 5 people altogether now. We've kind of managed to, you know, really finance a position working on open source there.
That's cool. That's a really great model, right? Because it's always like a struggle to keep open source going because there's no income coming in. So it's cool that you're able to balance that and actually have sustainable income to support it.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty happy that this actually worked out to that degree. That I mean, when we set out, we really weren't sure if this was going to work out to that degree, and whether this is going to just provide a little bit of side income to spend a couple hours more here and there. And I think we're really glad that it did work out to the degree that we're at now.
Nice. Can we dive in a little bit to technical details of V2? I guess first, like why V2 at all? What problems were you trying to solve there? And then what exactly is changing, and maybe a little bit under the hood, you know, what optimizations are there? What should users expect? And you know, I've tried it out. It's much faster, so I think people will be pretty surprised and happy with that.
Shall I start maybe with a bit like the background of what I kind of focused on, and then I think Jordi, you can give like a better overview over all the other things that happened and changed.
Yeah, sounds good.
So I think like what mattered to me a lot, or I guess my like background is that I started working on this dependency solver in the beginning, and that's kind of still like the one area that I really know very well or that I work on a regular basis. And so I think my main wish for Composer 2 was on one side, obviously make some performance improvements, memory improvements, because that's always an issue for people. And we've optimized so much in Composer 1 within the framework that like what we can do, that there's hardly anything you can really get out of that anymore. And so the idea was to make some bigger refactorings that would allow us to restructure the entire process of how the metadata is loaded, how that's then used to construct these graphs that we then do dependency resolution on, and then how that gets actually installed in the end, to allow, first of all, to optimize this better, but second of all, to allow further improvements in the future. So I think we're not done with that yet. There's like plenty of ideas how we can further optimize, but it required some of these bigger refactorings and restructurings of the internal process. And that really is what resulted in the necessity of doing a Composer version 2, because this means that plugins are going to be incompatible. And then because of that, we kind of decided we're going to have to do a Composer version 2. There's lots of other things that we'd like to change if we're going to make a new big major release that can have VC breaks, even though we try and keep them to the absolute minimum for end users. So for example, like I said, plugins are one thing that really do have to change a tiny amount. Like it's mostly that there can be some interfaces that are incompatible. For most part, they work fine. You just kind of have to test them. Anyway, so that was kind of the origin of why we started working on a Composer version 2. And then in terms of technical details on the part that I focused on, what I was trying to explain earlier is that we refactored a lot the process of how installation and update works. And I think what's actually interesting as a user also there is that we try to make the process a lot clearer of what a Composer update and a Composer install is. I think that when we set out to build Composer, we had this idea of a log file, but we didn't quite have quite as clear a picture of the typical workflows people would have in the end. And so in terms of how the code was structured and built, a Composer update and a Composer install were actually kind of the same function, that just depending on which one you use, there's like a couple different flags that allow certain packages to update or not, but it's kind of the same code. And this leads to lots of problems. Like for one thing, it made the code kind of difficult over the time just to work with, but also to weird edge cases, behaviors that you don't expect, because the Composer update process in our view today should really be what takes a Composer JSON file, looks at what are all the remote repositories, which versions can I take, generates me a composer.log file. And then there's the Composer install process, which takes a composer.log file and just looks at the URLs to download files in there and sticks them in the vendor directory, and that's it. So they're kind of like two very distinct processes that do two very different things. But because they kind of came from this same set, for example, one of the inputs to Composer update in version 1 is what you currently have installed in your vendor directory. This kind of came from before we even had this concept of a log file, and at the same time, it was kind of hard to remove because install doesn't need that, right? Because the install step where you want to get your vendor directory into the same state as the log file needs the vendor directory as some kind of input to know which packages are already there, which ones do I have to update, which ones do I have to remove. But the update process, if it starts taking stuff from your vendor directory, that leads to really weird edge cases where some package doesn't exist remotely anymore, or like in your Composer JSON, you made like a typo, but for some reason a package with that typo actually exists in your vendor directory. And then this generates a valid log file that tries to install some package that doesn't actually exist anywhere outside of your own vendor directory on the machine that you happen to be developing this on. And I think the most common scenario for this is actually metadata changes. So if people move a package from one Git repository to another, or like with private packages, we have this where like if you mirror certain packages, then this metadata is also stored in the vendor directory. And for efficiency reasons, or which again, during a Composer install makes sense to just leave the vendor directory as it is. Composer update in version 1 would have actually take this metadata and just stick it back in the log file. So you're really trying to get like the up-to-date metadata for a package, and instead of downloading this from the network, it would just take it out of your vendor directory. So you have to kind of delete your vendor directory to make sure that you can generate a clean log file that somebody else can then use. And that kind of stuff was just really hard to fix in Composer version 1 because it requires these major refactorings and like the order of what all of these things happen. And so as an effect, for example, in Composer 2 now, when you run one of your typical Composer update commands, instead of previously where you'll just get a list of these are the packages being installed, removed, updated, you will now actually get first a set of operations on the log file. So it'll tell you like this was added to the log file, this was removed from the log file, this was changed in the log file. And then second, it will tell you these packages now got installed into your vendor directory, this was removed from your vendor directory. Because these two things may not be the same thing, right? Like just because like if your vendor directory may not even be in sync with the current state of the log file. So when I'm updating like my one package from version 1 to version 2 in the log file, it may actually never have been installed in the vendor directory because the last time I ran a Composer install was before this was even added to the log file, because some colleague did that, for example. And so those two things are just like very distinct processes, and that's a lot clearer in Composer version 2 now. And yeah, I guess Jordi should fill in a bit more on the other things that changed, like all the networking stuff and all the cool other small features here and there.
Yeah, so I think what you highlighted is, to me, it's actually one of the biggest features is that like the outcome of all these like nerdy internal changes is that things are way more predictable, and that's really essential, because in terms of like bug reports that are impossible to reproduce, this will really help a lot. Otherwise, yeah, we have parallel downloads, both for packages, which is like something like Prestissimo used to do as a plugin, but also for the metadata. So that means really like updates will also be much faster. A bunch more internal changes there to the metadata, which should lead to hopefully improvement in like bandwidth and so on. Together with that, we also do like, because we download things in parallel, it actually makes more sense to download all the things and then install them. So that means that when you run a Composer install, it actually should do like all the network stuff it needs to do first, including like Git repos. If you have things installed as a Git clone, it will go and like do a Git fetch and all of these, just to make sure like you have all the stuff needed to be ready to install. And when that happened, it actually does the installation on disk. So that theoretically, I mean, unless things can still go wrong sometimes, but it's in most cases the problems happen with network. So that means in most cases you should have, if a problem happens, it's going to happen before it touched the vendor directory, so you don't end up in a weird state where you like updated half the packages, or something got removed and like it couldn't install again or something like that. So that's also like just overall reliability is much better, I think. And then finally, I think the last big one I would highlight is error reporting. So the solver, when resolution just cannot happen and you have conflict somehow, we worked really hard on trying to improve the output there, and just making sure that the stuff is a little bit more readable, a little bit less of a wall of text of like cryptic web messages, which like you mentioned in the beginning, it's nice, it's helpful, but for a lot of people it's too much, and it's actually like they just don't read it. They see this and they're like, and either they're like, just it's a sad day at the office, or they report an issue and we have to tell them what happened. So we tried to improve things in a way that they can help themselves a little bit more. That obviously has to be proven still, whether it will be successful, but I'm hoping. Other than that, I mean, there's tons of smaller things which, I mean, smaller or bigger. I'm not even sure anymore. Like the list is growing. Like it's getting insane. I published a blog post last week. If you wanna go, you can go on blog.packages.com. And the last post there is this update on Composer v2. It includes like also the link to the changelog and so on. So I guess if you're really interested in getting the full picture, that's the best place to go.
I think to just get back to what Ben already said, so I think one big improvement is going to be performance. It's going to be difficult to say exactly how much this improves what and where, because there are like a lot of different factors at play. There's the whole parallel downloading of metadata packages that Jordi spoke of, which is going to make a huge impact for a lot of people where this is kind of network constrained, where that's typically the case with composer commands. But then there's also the issue that a lot of people face with the amount of memory consumption. And that's been improved through a couple different steps. On one side, through the changes to how the metadata gets loaded, to some of the optimization steps that we've added that we can do now that we've restructured the code, some of the internal changes we've made to the solver. And another one that I think is kind of cool that might actually be like understandable, like something that we don't have to like dive deep into some code now, is actually that because of how we've restructured this, it's a lot easier for us now to optimize partial updates. So partial updates are this thing where you run composer update with a particular argument, right? If you're just trying to upload one package or like 5 packages, or you can use the with dependencies flag to update one particular package and its dependencies. And most importantly, actually, this is also what's run under the hood if you run composer require for a package name, which is very commonly used now. Like if you use the composer require command to add a new dependency to your project, what it really kind of does is just it edits the composer JSON file to add this dependency in there and runs a composer update just for that particular package, and optionally its dependencies depending on the flags that you use. And previously, like that kind of an update would, in terms of performance, memory consumption, be kind of exactly the same as if you just did a full composer update across the project. But now, because we've remodeled like what are the inputs to a composer update command versus an install command, it can actually very strictly tie all the packages that are not being updated to only the state that exists in the log file, and will never even make network requests to get updated information on the other packages. We'll never consider any of the other versions in the dependency solver, while previously the dependency solver would have to actually figure out like, oh, there's all these other versions, but oh, we actually just want to keep the one that we already have. Okay, let's skip all the other ones, which in terms of memory, you can imagine will make a huge impact. So while this doesn't itself improve composer update, this particular thing, it will impact, I think, the experience that a lot of people have, because you either run composer require more frequently, or when you update, you don't really update everything at the same time in a lot of cases, but you really do want to update like one particular package and its dependencies. And so there, actually, we're going to see like huge improvements. Even with the general composer update for everything, I've seen some reports now, pretty big projects that report somewhere like 50, 65% memory reduction, performance improvements, some even higher than that. So, and then a partial composer update is going to be even a lot more than that. So I'm really looking forward to seeing more people actually try this out and getting a few more numbers, because this will depend a lot on this particular project you're working on. And what our tests show is not necessarily what you'll end up seeing in real life. So I'm kind of really curious to hear from more people testing Composer, how that goes.
That's awesome. I'm pretty excited about it. In my testing at work, it saved about 20% off of our Composer install time, just with a fresh report.
Just the Composer install, or
yeah,
so
just
like with the log file present?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think there you're mostly benefiting from like the parallel downloads then.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's even using like an older package server, right? That's not packages.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I mean. It's like depending on which part, like, if you're running Composer install or Composer update, if you're running a full Composer update or Composer update just for some packages, like your performance changes are going to vary because there are a lot of different elements that get run for each of these different commands, depending on the situation that you're running in. So it's kind of difficult to just give here's the number for how much faster it is, because it really depends.
Cool. What's your release plan for this? I know you're in like a beta stage now, right? So what's kind of the plan for what's next?
I think the bottom line is it's really always just when it's done, but I'm hoping within like a month or two we can get to a stable, just because at this point unless anyone reports really critical issues, it seems to work fine. I mean, I've been using it on my projects like for months and fixing tons of edge cases already like that. So I mean, we now see like, I don't know, I checked yesterday, I think it was like 0.6% of updates happening via Composer 2, which is not yet much, but it's still like, it's big numbers. 0.6% of big number is still quite something. And so I would say it seems to be working mostly fine, as we were not seeing an onslaught of issue reports. So yeah, I think it's really mostly about getting a last couple features in that we want to get in, and just stability fixes, and then we should be good to go.
So you said the main BC break with this is plugins, right? Are there any really popular plugins that you're working with to get upgraded, or that you're worried about this breaking?
So actually that's what I was just about to mention, is that I think the stability of Composer itself is there, but the problem is getting the stability of the ecosystem, right? Like, it's because of all these plugins. Like if your project uses any of the plugins and you run a Composer update with V2 right now, most likely there's just no available version of the plugin for V2. So you're gonna get a conflict saying, hey, some package wants Composer plugin API 1 and you're using 2, so that just doesn't resolve. So I emailed like a bunch of plugin authors a few weeks ago, or possibly a month ago at this point. I just looked at like the top by downloads. I don't remember how many, like top 50 or something, and emailed most of them. That didn't really help a lot, to be honest. But I mean, it's how it is. Like, people are busy, and it's also kind of weird times with all this COVID-19. It's things are not running as they should, and so it's just taking a while. And I think I've seen like some people starting to send pull requests as well to plugins. I've myself sent a couple to things that were blocking for my projects. And then I think, yeah, I mean, we're there to help as well. Like, we've definitely talked with some plugin authors, and we're helping out where we can. We can't update them all because it's just like a ton of them, but I think getting the most popular ones ready to migrate would already get most of the people in a spot where they can move to V2 easily.
I think that they're like, basically, if you're using Composer pretty bare bones, so either without plugins or like some pretty basic ones, or then you're going to have like a pretty smooth experience. You're not really going to notice that you've upgraded. And I think that's kind of part of the explanation for why there's actually already that many Composer 2 users, even though there's no release, right? It's just like snapshots that we're currently building. Is that usually the transition is very smooth. But there are going to be a couple, or I think that's what we need testers for now, is there's going to be these particular niches. So I think one of the first ones we ran into is that in the Magento world, there's a particular practice around how they use they have their own Magento Composer repository instead of packages.org for a lot of the Magento packages. And so they kind of helped us uncover a particular behavior change that was probably have been fine for pretty much everyone everywhere else. Maybe there would have been a couple edge cases here or there, but that just really didn't work for their use case. So we added like a couple new config options for them to be able to make this work in like a similar way to Composer version 1. But that said, I think like the large majority of PHP developers isn't really going to have to interact with these. But that's why also as we get more testers now, we find a couple more of these, I guess, niches which have very specific workflows or that use some kind of tooling that itself accesses Composer or like the generated files by Composer in some way that we are not aware of. That we're just finding out about now. Those are really the only places where upgrading has a bit of a hurdle. Like by default, like Composer JSON does not need to be edited. Your log file will install just fine with Composer 2 if it work with Composer 1, with always the one caveat, as long as the plugins are actually compatible.
So to kind of like you touched on it there for a second with like the whole Magento issue. Is there any sort of like long-term support for any Composer 1 version, or are you really hoping to get as many people migrated up to version 2 and then move forward from there?
So we're definitely hoping to get everyone migrated like as soon as possible. There are a few aspects to that. Is that, I mean, the first one is maintaining 2 versions is a pain, like both for just dealing with the code, but also already now we're seeing like issue reports are coming in and people don't mention which version they're using. You know, it seems to make sense or not, and like it's just having these 2 major versions which behave very differently is just it's just very confusing. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is packages.org, which we really don't want to keep maintaining the v1 metadata forever, basically. So so an LTS kind of thing where we're talking about years, definitely not. I mean, if we can avoid it, it's not gonna happen because it's just pain for no gain. And so yeah, I think like the other main thing we did for that is that v2 actually still supports PHP 5.3, which these days is kind of crazy. Let's be honest, like it's 2019, 20 now. I'm still in 2019 now because of all this COVID-19 stuff. But it is 2020, and like PHP, I don't know, like 7.1 has been deprecated, I think, EOL last year. So people still relying on 5.3 is just like, it's just insane, right? But there are still some. And so, yeah, we just wanted to keep supporting them just to make sure that everyone gets a migration path up to v2, at least to 2.0. And then what's most likely going to happen is that 2.0 becomes kind of the LTS version for these people, where we do bug fixes. And then 2.1 or 2.2 at least would move on to support only like PHP 7.2 plus or something like that.
So with PHP 8 now on the horizon, is there any features that you really hope to take advantage of in the coming versions? And would that kind of prompt you to bump up to another major version, or are you hoping to kind of keep that still in the V2 realm?
I think the way I always like to explain this is that Composer, like how do you upgrade to the new PHP version? Like the tool you're using to do that is Composer, because you need to upgrade all your libraries to be compatible, etc. So like we kind of try to be behind the wave there a bit, just to be able to really support people with upgrading all their dependencies to be able to use new PHP versions. So we're like Georgie just said, we're still working with PHP 5.3 right now. Like you can't, like an array still has to be created using the array function and stuff like that. And while yes, we're looking forward to not having to do that anymore, we're not going to be using any PHP 8 features anytime soon.
So to kind of switch topics, Taylor is kind of always like the BDFL of Laravel. Who is the BDFL of Composer, and why is it Jordy?
No, I think we're doing a fairly good job of communicating on things and.
So I mean, with that though, like how is it working together, both like remotely in a normal situation and also with like the whole virus going on? Like, do y'all have a standard workflow that you follow as a company, or is it just kind of everyone works when they can, gets their things done, and then goes on with their day?
I mean, as a company, I think we're all used to working remotely anyways. Like we're kind of spread out to begin with. So the situation right now is not that new. There is a tiny office that we have in Berlin. It's really only used by, I guess, 2.5 of us. It's only other once in a while, which we're not using right now. But yeah, like the process hasn't really changed a whole lot from what we usually do.
And so if someone really wanted to support Composer and packages in y'all's efforts, would you put a higher value on like someone signing up for private packages, or trying to help triage issues, contribute code, and things like that on the open source side?
I mean, I think it depends. I mean, on one side, what are you able or willing to give? If like what you have available is time, then we appreciate the time. If what you have available is money, we appreciate the money. And I think we always say that the issue, or like the reason that we need to finance this project is not because we have like an expensive server somewhere, or because there's like, I don't know, bandwidth costs too much money. That's really very little money compared to how much money it costs to have developers paid for their work. So the issue is really time. So in that sense, if you have the time to contribute, please do. If not, the next best thing is to provide us with the financial support to spend that time on your behalf. So private packages. That said, I think actually with Composer 2 coming out now, at least from my perspective, it's been pretty cool to see a couple more people contribute either small new features or like kind of work on some of the open issues. We do try and mark some of them as like easy to start with the project with, and it's been kind of cool to see a couple more people contribute again.
Nice. I think that's really all I had. Is there anything you want to leave people with? Any parting words or anything to encourage people to try out Composer 2? Also, are there any docs updates that are coming out? I see the blog post kind of list the new features, but is there any certain place everyone should go to see what's new?
No, I mean docs. I was just working on a document earlier about a couple of new features which I noticed were really not mentioned anywhere. But I think most things are kind of new flags to a command here and there and stuff like that. It's like there are not that many really major new features that would warrant like a big documentation page. But yeah, I would say having a good look at the changelog, which I realize is getting harder and harder because it's getting really long. But that's really the best way to go, I think.
And I think otherwise there's the upgrading document that Georgie wrote as well, which definitely helps with focusing on the things that actually, I guess, matter to you as you upgrade. So while it doesn't highlight like a cool new option you can use to do something somewhere, it will tell you about other things that really you should know about, depending on whether you're just a user of Composer, whether you're a plugin author, or if you're running your own Composer repository.
Yeah, just
Cool.
list
And for
all the breaking changes and
anyone who wants to try it out, it's just composer self-update dash snapshot. Is that right?
yep. For now, that's it. I'm hoping to push the first alpha or something next week. So at that point, just dash preview would become the new, like, most stable option. Let's say the snapshots are always available, but preview gets you like the pre-releases tags.
Cool. Yeah. So, in case we don't drop this for the next 3.5 weeks, if Ben gets lazy, Jordy's talking about the first week in May, give or take.
Oh, I see.
So, you never know. Ben might get sick. I might get sick. One of us will
Right.
get that kind of thing.
So
Where can
Composer
everyone...
Stable is already out, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jordy knows, where can everyone find, if they don't know already, where can they find you online to kind of get updates for all of this stuff?
I guess there's a few different places. There's Packages account on Twitter, which will help. There's our personal accounts, Seldike and Netherman. I guess for like the big announcements, we're going to use blog.packages.com, like with the development update. And I'm sure once we actually do some big releases, we'll have another blog post on there with like a summary of what really changed. So those are probably the best places. And then if you want to see a few more details, GitHub. Take a look at the issues, take a look at what's going on in pull requests if you want to try and get involved in any of those things. And then, I think on the Get Composer website at some point we'll have the changelog is on there anyways, but we'll probably have like some kind of overview of we're migrating from 1 to 2 / what's new as well. But that doesn't exist yet.
Cool. Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for taking some time out of your night to come hang out with us. Congratulations again on the V2, and we look forward to seeing what comes next.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.